Hi there, this is Professor Pancham here, and today I will be bringing you a guide to a build that I am calling the Cold Brew Shinobi, a cold conversion acid flask Bladedancer. There are two key sources of inspiration for this build: the Frostbite Falconer, which utilizes uniques such as Frozen Ire and Snowdrift to scale Frostbite's damage over time, and the Explosive Flask Bladedancer, which utilizes the Explosive Flask node on the Acid Flask tree to deal lots of on-hit damage. I decided to combine these two concepts, taking the on-hit approach while also taking the conversion that we'd get from going the Frostbite Falconer version, and thus we have created this build. Before we get into the details, however, I want to go over a quick roadmap as to what this guide will cover. I'll start by outlining the three core components of the build and how they interact with each other. We'll then head over to Last Epoch tools, where I'll set up my build planner, and we'll talk about the skills and passives more in depth, as well as gearing, idols, and blessings. After that, I'll showcase some gameplay in a T4 Temporal Sanctum, as well as some mapping and bossing in just under 500 corruption. With that being said, let's get into the video. There are three core components to this build: Acid Flask, Explosive Trap, and Shadows. Acid Flask is the primary damage skill for the build. We will be converting its damage fully to cold using the offhand catalyst Vial of Volatile Ice. We will additionally scale its damage through the Explosive Flask node native to the Acid Flask tree, as well as taking increases to Critical Strike Multiplier, cold damage, cold penetration, and throwing damage. Additionally, we're going to scale the number of times we can activate the skill through triggering it indirectly with Explosive Trap. With Explosive Trap's Instrument of the Alchemist and Trap Sprinkler nodes, along with the synergies that allow us to throw more traps per activation, we can get up to 5 flasks per activation of Explosive Trap, which is really nice. Additionally, to supplement our trap uptime, we will be taking Shadows, because they are also able to throw traps for us. While they can't throw as many traps as we do, the fact that they can throw them in the first place is really nice to supplement not only our offenses, but as I'll explain later, our defenses. With that being said, let's take a deeper dive into the build over at Last Epoch tools. Alright, now to talk skills, passives, and gear for a brief minute. Skill-wise, let's start with Acid Flask. Three big ticket items are Explosive Flask, Piercing Debris, and Knowledge of Immunity. Explosive Flask for hit damage, don't worry about the conversion here, this gets overwritten by Vial of Volatile Ice. Piercing Debris for crit scaling, and Knowledge of Immunity, which also converts via Vial of Volatile Ice from Poison Pen per Poison Resist to Cold Pen per Cold Resist. We're already scaling Cold Res for Frostbite Shackles, and so not only getting Warp Retention scaling, but also getting Cold Pen scaling is really nice. Shift is honestly the Swiss Army knife of the build. We get culling through Consumed by Shadow, we leave behind a Shadow, we get to drop an Acid Flask, and most importantly, it serves as a mana battery for the build with Swift Recovery, which we take full advantage of through being low life. This is arguably the most versatile skill of the build, and you should be casting the skill off cooldown when you can. Explosive Trap is a pretty straightforward trap trigger tree. I do want to specify one thing about how we trigger Acid Flask though. We're only triggering it through activation of Trap Sprinkler or Trebuchet, meaning that when a trap drops or flings. Because of automated bombardment, we guarantee that our first set of traps will drop or fling, but not our second set of traps, or traps that have been dropped or flung. Meaning that while we can get 10 traps per cast of Explosive Trap, we only actually get 5 flasks. I do want to point out that this does cost mana to actually trigger Instrument of the Alchemist, which we will remedy later when I talk about gearing. The big ticket item of this build is actually Smoke Traps though, and this gives us a lot. Dust Shroud in general gives us a lot for the build. Currently, with the 60 stacks of Dust Shroud, we reach way over Glancing Blow chance cap, and a lot of dodge chance that we are sorely missing without the skill. We go from 7% dodge chance and 16% Glancing Blow chance to, I think it was like 300% Glancing Blow, yeah, 316, and 75% dodge chance, which is really big for defensives. Sweat Bomb, I'd say there are a couple big ticket items that I personally like. However, you can customize the skill to your preferences. Cleansing Steam, we do need a cleanse for this build. This is the easiest way to get it. Smoke Blades, flat throwing damage. We have a lot of percent damage with this build, so getting flat damage increases is really valuable. Umbral Assault for shadow consistency, and Rapid Concealment for dust shroud consistency. However, you can opt to spec into something like Thick Smoke or Eroding Fumes, or even Concealed in Carnage if you really want to. Spec the skill how you would like. Decoy, big ticket items are going to be the synergy between Grand Diversion and Shrouded Core. This makes it so that we can throw 3 decoys on activation, and each of those decoys leaves behind a shadow, kind of making it a pseudo sync strike. And then the other big ticket item on here is Ambush, which gives you your current dodge chance as crit multi, meaning that with this current configuration, we'd have an additional 75% crit multi when decoy detonates. I also convert this skill to cold. Might as well have fun with it. It's a cold conversion build. And then I also get an additional charge of the skill through Backup Buddy. Passive-wise, there's nothing terribly special, except for one thing in particular. Death's Door. Death's Door is how we're able to reach guaranteed crit on Acid Flask through giving us flat crit while we're at low health. This sets our base crit to 29%, and then with the modifiers from Piercing Debris, in addition to Critical Eye, we actually end up exceeding 100% crit chance for the flasks, which is really, really nice because we no longer have to look for crit scaling on gear. After that, 2 things in the Falconer tree. Stamina of the Rover, which we basically have full uptime on for mana on dodge, plus the dodge rating percent. Mana regen are really nice, as well as Blast Radius, giving us mana on decoy detonation. This is per decoy, so with our current config, we get 12 mana back with this setup. Gearing wise, there are a couple of things that are mandatory for this build, but affixes are generally pretty straightforward. Big ticket items are going to be 2 tier 7 throwing cost and mana reduction rings, a level 4 decoy helm, and an experimental affix Frostbite Shackles. Apart from that, you're looking for low life uniques, Vial of Volatile Ice, ideally an Omnis for the +1, and then res flexibility, Droughts Release for implicit crit multi, plus a level to Acid Flask just for more point flexibility, Usanoi Sphere for more cold res and cold damage. And then this belt can kind of just be whatever. I use it to fix my resists on my current character. But this is probably the most flexible affix item. To go over things specifically, Frostbite Shackles, you want this to supplement your ward. Ward is how we're going to be scaling essentially our artificial health in the endgame. And the more ward we have, the more flexibility we have with the damage we can take. You don't need tier 7 on this. I would settle for tier 5 or tier 6 if you can get it or if you can afford it. Generally speaking, you just want this affix on here. The rings are irreplaceable. You absolutely need the rings. This is because, as I mentioned earlier, Explosive Trap, Instrument of the Alchemist, will consume a portion of Acid Flask's mana to actually trigger Acid Flasks. And if we reduce that cost to 0, which we can through having 2 of these rings, we don't actually consume that mana. Acid Flask, just for reference, costs 10 mana at base. 2 of these rings at tier 7 reduces that to 0. The levels to decoy is here for comfortability. However, if you don't have this helm or don't want to take this helm, I would consider dropping points in Backup Buddy and 3 points out of Embedded Spikes, and just taking that tree as is. You don't really need it. I just like it because it gives us more convenience. Idle-wise, pretty straightforward. Throne of Ambition for armor and cold damage. I think this is a staple for most fire and cold damage builds at this point. The adjacent idols, we're taking crit multi and throwing damage, except I take increased armor stride effect on one of them. In combination with, no, not skills, passive-wise, Bladedancer, Hooked Blades. On a high roll, we can get about 100% increased armor stride effect. Really nice, especially against higher corruption enemies and enemies that have higher armor. The small Ligonians are ward protection and cold res. You can spec into something like armor instead of ward retention, or health, or shared cold damage instead of cold res. This is just what I prefer. I think it ends up being better in the end game. Blessing wise, we're only going to pay attention to the defensive / offensive blessings, nothing regarding shards. Void res, you can opt to take crit multi here. I just like having comfortable resistances, so this is what I'm taking. All resistance, this is It's non-negotiable. You do need this. It scales our hold res. It makes it easier for us to just gear res in general. As you can see here, even with like this being at like max, I'm still struggling to get fizz res, and so you definitely need this. I take double armor here. There is an argument for, instead of the percent armor here, to go something like cold shred or cold resistance. I'd say both of those are perfectly fine. I just like the little bit of mitigation that we get additionally from scaling armor. And then I went back and forth on this blessing in particular. I picked freeze rate multiplier just to have freeze as a more consistent defensive option, but you can opt to take ward per second or cold damage interchangeably. It really does not matter all that much. Overall, this gearing is what I consider, I don't think it's min-maxed, but it's efficient enough where you can get the gear without having to worry about a lot of uniques. There are a lot of uniques for the setup, but having a full unique setup and worrying about like getting slams on, let's say, an heirloom of the nomad, if I could spell, which I would consider to be the ring upgrade for this build, because of the cold res and void res. I think that this just makes gearing a little bit simpler, just choosing like mandatory stuff and then filling in the rest with exalteds that you can self-craft or you can trade for and whatnot. It makes it a little bit more approachable in my opinion. Furthermore, it makes the build a little bit less dependent on hitting the endgame. While you do need to hit endgame for this build, in my just for like the Omnis and whatnot, let alone getting LP on Frostbite Shackles, I do think that having the flexibility to run exalteds on a build does make it a little bit more approachable, which is my goal with this setup. So overall, this build gets quite a bit offensively. This crit chance is kind of deceptive because we do actually get crit cap because of acid class. Pretty high crit multi. We do scale of thank you, quite a lot of cold damage, but also having glancing blow cap, quite a bit of damage reduction, around nearly 800 ward retention, along with dodge chance being really high, having decent armor for the build without really scaling it, and overall it ends up being a really good blend of offense and defense, which I was honestly surprised about when I was putting this build together. So yeah, that has been my guide to the Cold Brew Shinobi. Had a lot of fun putting the skill together. I hope you guys had a lot of fun learning about it. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to leave a like. If you have any questions, you can leave a comment down below. You can also ask me over on Twitch. I do stream pretty often, mostly last Epoch at the moment. So if you have any questions about this build, feel free to ask me over there. And with that being said, this has been Professor Pancham. Thank you all for watching and have a great day.